Hi there, welcome to the eCommerce Nurse Podcast, our 33rd episode. I'm Karina McLeod, ex-Amazonian and CEO and founder of eCommerce Nurse and Vendor Society. Today we're going to be talking about how to unlock your global potential and reduce the barriers to international selling. We have a special guest, Daniel Steinman, branch manager at Z, an import and logistics provider helping Amazon FBA and e-commerce businesses grow worldwide. Daniel has extensive knowledge in the e-commerce space, specializing in helping brands grow globally. So a big thank you to Daniel and welcome to the show today.
Hi, Karina. Thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to just chatting everything e-commerce with you.
Awesome. Now, I've given a brief bio, but I always don't feel that does enough justice because I know you've got a lot more experience. So do you want to give our audience a bit more information about your experience to date?
Yeah, sure. So I think a bit more background is Z form part of the VAT IT Group, which is the world's largest import compliance business. I'm actually a proud brand owner myself on Shopify. It's a clothing brand in South Africa called Old School. So I joined the tech company with the goal to diverse a bit out of e-com. And when I joined, the sort of goal was to start an e-commerce leg within the group to assist this international growth. And I got pulled right back into e-commerce. And the last 2.5 years, I've just been back from both selling, but now also providing assistance to brands globally. But more about myself, I'm also a sommelier, so any wine-related queries, I'm also happy to assist. Big fan of rugby, so for the UK ones, I'd love to remember you about the World Cup final in 2019. As a Springbok fan, it was one of my best days. But further, I'm really just more here to share the knowledge I've gained with working with global brands and sort of looking at some of the headaches and hurdles they face for expanding and sort of looking at, when is the right time for you as a brand owner to consider this.
Awesome, thank you. Because we met a couple of months ago, or it might just been a month ago. Time just goes completely fast. Time flies. And we spoke about the whole international expansion and how many businesses have got that hunger to grow, and they either have tried to grow and done it unsuccessfully, or just don't know where to start. So what would you say if we start and talk about those common barriers when it comes to a business starting to expand beyond their home marketplace?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and it really depends on what your appetite for growth is. I work with brands that do 100 million a year on Amazon, and is only considering it now up to where brands are doing $1 million a year and saying their growth path is far beyond the US and want to sort of duplicate sales immediately in Europe and across the UK. So it really depends on the brand. I think some of the top things you need to consider is you need to make sure that your product has enough margin to sort of be able to absorb that in a foreign country, especially if you've been importing from China. It counts in your favor because now you're just routing your shipments from your Chinese manufacturer to different places across the globe. So a lot of times there's perception that there's all of these additional challenges, which is true, but having the right partners on the front end, like eCommerce Nurse and Z at the back end, could really streamline and simplify your growth. So I think it's margin, appetite for growth, and sort of looking at, does your brand have the potential to do well in these foreign markets?
You've raised a really good point there, because it's always seen as that additional cost, whereas actually the point that you've raised is almost there's a potential cost saving where you're actually, so let's say you're a US seller, you're used to sending that shipment from China to the US. Instead, you might look to expand to the UK, and you're then sending that shipment directly to the UK. I guess those common challenges, right, of, okay, so you've got that saving, you've got that hunger, you've done sort of done the maths, as it were, and figured out what is profitable. What are those next steps to basically, that whole compliance piece? I know is quite a scary piece for many businesses.
Yes, so I think it's like economics 101 is, if you go look at the growth in the US, just like the amount of sellers pre and post COVID, you're looking at about a 3x amount of new sellers coming to market. So before COVID, this is roughly 21 stats, so not exactly sure how it's changed this year, but they grew from 1 million to 3 million. But if you look at Amazon, UK and Germany, for instance, the seller base has only increased with 20%, although the revenue from Amazon across the border, 3-4x being US, UK, wherever. So when you are going into the UK and Europe, there's much higher barriers to entry, because not like the US where you can send your goods immediately. You first need to get a lot of the registration in place, and both the Europe and UK are quite renowned for being much more strict regarding all of the compliance you would need to get your products into that market. So I think that's where a lot of times there's this misperception that it is this extremely long and expensive process to get your goods in. But for me in life, it's always looking at the cost benefit analysis and saying, can I absorb this, and does that make sense? So yes, to get back to your question, there is a lot of compliance to get in, which would be to get your products legal for import and sale, and then all of the tax registration and YORI numbers that goes with it. But if you have someone that you can outsource that work to, it could actually be a quite seamless process for you. And just to be honest, you just need to wait 3 months for all of these registrations and compliance to be in place. But if you enter these markets, you are competing with much less competitors in that market for the same pie you're doing in the US. So for brands that has a moat in terms of their product and the quality, for me, it's always a no-brainer to say, instead of fighting all of the Chinese black hats in the US and fighting your ranking up to the max PPC that you can afford, it's worth looking at if this opportunity in the UK and Europe could open additional revenues at a lower cost for you. But like I said, it depends from brand to brand. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really key point, as in it is quite saturated, right? If we're talking about US sellers, and there is that opportunity. And the biggest thing that I pulled out from that is the planning piece. Is that I think there's this part where we know that Amazon almost oversells the opportunity, but the small print is basically the small print, and businesses get so excited about that opportunity, they almost want it immediately. And as you say, as long as you planning like the whole registration piece, because we've seen that where businesses don't register or are not registered for VAT, and all of a sudden their account's suspended.
Yeah, look, it's half of my job is perception management, Karina, because it's so important for my clients to understand a Q4 launch means end of Q2 plan and like approval to get going. If you want to start, if you've got a supplement brand that will do well in January, we need to start everything yesterday, right? Because there's so much that we need to do. But a lot of times, out of sight, out of mind. And for sellers, they always want to chase the money now, but they sometimes lack to sort of look at it and say, looking at this business, we need to plan ahead. And I think it's probably you guys have same things where people will come and ask for miracles to happen before, Prime Day in October. But it's like, you've had the account managers had these conversations since July and August, and now you're in the backseat. But I think that is unfortunately just how it is being a service provider, is the customer is always right. So you try and make it work. But as you said, I think planning is so key. And to have these conversations 6 months beforehand, it's not something that you need to consider. It's something you have to do so that you can work back and make sure your things are in order.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess there is that upfront investment then, right? Because, I think that's almost that sometimes some businesses are almost like, well, we don't know what the return is going to be, so why invest? But if you don't invest, you're not going to be able, you're not even going to get your foot off the ground. And so is it unrealistic for businesses that are looking to expand to expect, a positive ROI from day one?
It depends on your margin, but definitely possible if you've reached a certain size. I think it's taken us a while to realize that if brands aren't doing at least 500,000-600,000 a year in their home market, or expecting to do $1 million within the next year, and they don't have enough margin, it's not the right time. I think the US market has proven there's place for thousands and thousands and thousands of brands to do $1 million a year. If you go look at that sort of like pyramid upwards, it's going from $1 million to 5 million, from 5 to 10, from 10 to 20, where it becomes extremely difficult. So if you aren't doing that type of revenue in the States on your home market yet, I would purely say just focus on that for now. Then diversifying into other countries might just actually distract you from getting it. And it would be difficult for me to promise you a positive ROI, because I think, to be fair, and like, as I said, expectation management, Europe and the UK is great. But if you're a US business, you should be looking at a minimum 15 and at a max 50 or 60% of your sales additionally from these markets, right? But if you're a $10 million brand, that's really exciting. That's maybe the quickest way for you to gain that extra 6 million. Whereas if you're at 500,000, I think that an investment in compliance and in taxes might just be a monthly occurrence fee that you're actually wasting your time. So it depends on the brand and the product. I suppose if you've got enough margin and you might have a great opportunity in that foreign country, go for it. So for example, in Australia, any pool equipment or that does exceptionally well. In Japan, jewelry does well. So if you're in this niche categories that do well, by all means, maybe do that earlier. And I think that's where agencies like eCommerce Nurses comes in handy. There's people that could look at these opportunities for you, really go work out what managing this exposure would look like. And it's a really easy calculation for you to say, here's the risk, here's the upside, and does it make sense?
Definitely, because we even see that where, is it some businesses want to expand globally almost too early in their journey, right? Because you do see that it's almost like, let's just like expand. It's like that whole thing of going way too broad and then classify Europe as Europe. Which isn't Europe, if you're selling on Amazon.
6 countries, yes. Yeah. 6 countries.
Or it's even going up, I think now with Belgium, it's Poland, Sweden, so going up to about 9 now. So, it's that kind of blanket approach is no longer, it doesn't really work. So if let's say for our audience, and I know our audience is global, we do a huge amount of listeners actually from the US. If they're looking to expand, what would you say are the kind of key steps, like almost if there were a checklist that businesses should be looking at? Yeah,
so I think especially for the R&D and looking at the opportunity, without blowing Z's horn, we can help you a lot of the R&D upfront, in terms of calculating your duties and taxes in a foreign country, what your landed cost would be with freight, with import, with brokerage, having an importer of record that like sort of takes off that burden of setting up an entity in a foreign country, running your entire tax registration and your compliance, especially if you have a bit more complex one like supplements or food or electronics. It's a no-brainer to have these conversations. And for me, there's no point in going ahead with it if the opportunity and the margin doesn't make sense for you. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we could help with an R&D perspective. So tax registration, compliance, logistics, import, and brokerage. And then above that, additional checks you need to make sure is, brand registry. Are you able to actually get that registered in a foreign country? You don't want to take your private label brand over and it's not possible, or there's some thing. So get that done. And I think the other thing to look at is the opportunity. Now you can pull some stats from Jungle Scout or wherever, but I think that's where having intros and talking to agencies that understand the UK and European markets, they'll give you, just as I'm giving you from a back-end perspective, a really good idea of what the opportunity is so that you can make sure, does the volume for your product justify the investment cost? Those are the main things. And I think additionally, as I mentioned, brand registry, maybe looking at translations, what your monthly cost is for all of the things to consider, and does it have an ROI? I think for year one, breaking even isn't a bad thing because you're opening up foreign channels, but you need to know that there is growth beyond that. And I think that's where it needs to go. And I think the last consideration is are you going into Amazon directly, or do you want to take a container over and do that via 3PL? Additional costs you need to look at. But I think I'm almost scaring people away saying all of these additional costs. It's more saying, it's an investment. So you need to go and have someone that does the hard work for you to get you to the point that you can make the decision to say, does this make sense? Yes or no?
Yeah, definitely. And really, it's like, it shouldn't be so scary because you have to do that in any country, right?
Yes.
It's just more, you don't know how other countries work. So
Yes.
instead of having to figure it out, you've got businesses like yourselves that know how it's done and can just simplify that. And you've raised a really interesting point about, you know, brand registry. We've seen this happen where you've got your trademark in one country and then you go to register your trademark in another country and it's already been taken effectively by another company, or your brand translates into something that could be offensive or have a negative impact in that.
No, exactly.
Well.
So it is something to look at. But it's just ticking those boxes, as I said. But I think if you speak to the right providers, you'll get a great extent of the way you do it. I think alternatively, you can do everything yourself, right? I think if you want to, Amazon has VAT services, there's a lot of things you can try and set up yourself, but it's those, you know, time versus reward. You know, your time is money as a brand owner. And I think especially like setting it up initially properly so that it can succeed. There's nothing worse than trying to save a few $100 and sit with all of the compliance headaches, all of the emails, like tax officers coming after you. You know, I think there's so many people I speak to that figured it out and they're just like, I wish I never tried and do everything myself, because the amount of time it took me to do did not justify my work. So there, I think, just as PPC and people managing your accounts, it's important to realize the value of having a service provider that could take care of a holistic solution for you when you're expanding.
Definitely. And it's not something you play with, right? That the costs are worth it. We've seen it before where businesses have had stock stuck at customs because they haven't used a company that's advised them on, they don't have an importer of record, they haven't even got an EORI number, even though they have their VAT registration, they didn't, you know, and we hear, I mean, we've seen so many, and they often come to us because they're, you know, a number of businesses will come to you when they're at problem stage rather than come to you like 6 months to a year before when you could have probably avoided that instance in the first place.
Yeah, so it's a good point, and I think it is maybe a key like concept for the audience to understand. It's just, what is an importer of record exactly, and why is it so important? So I mean, that's what our core business is built on. We have, you know, a division in the tech and medical business that service more than half of the Fortune 500 with their global deployment. But when you are importing into Europe, or Germany, any country there, or the UK, you actually need an entity that has all of the import licenses and the physical presence to import on your behalf. So you want someone that, because the stock hasn't sold to Amazon and you're still the owner, customs is going to ask you who's importing these goods, and Amazon would not put their names on those documentation. And yes, sometimes your goods might clear customs without having an importer on that, but for 7 years after an importation, customs can go after that importation, and there's financial penalties, duties and taxes, and an audit trail that needs to be maintained for that shipment, right? So you got basically two options. You can outsource it to a company that can take over the entire process of the brokerage, act as your importer, do the clearance for you in country, or you can go and actually set up an entity with a physical presence and the licenses needed. But almost in all cases, the yearly cost of maintaining those entities and those employees in that country doesn't justify the cost and the effort of doing that. But once again, that's up to clients. We work with brands that do hundreds of millions of dollars a year across the globe, which could probably justify having it there. But for brands that's growing, you know, risk mitigation becomes a very important key. You know, if you're doing $1 million a year, it probably isn't the buzzword for you. But as you move into a brand that wants to get funding, that wants to go into retail, that wants to have proper investor decks, you know, knowing that your global business is compliant is a key concept that you need to put a value on. And that's something we can provide, or someone else. But I think it's an important thing to realize that rushing internationally and trying to find alternative ways in the long run could cause you much more headaches. And I think sleeping easy at night is sometimes worth a few extra bucks. Completely.
And that's really good that you explained that importer of record. We often get asked that question. well, that's fine. Surely we can put Amazon on there as the importer of record. And it's like, no. Well, we're sending stock straight to Amazon FBA. So surely they can be the importer of record. But
look, if you are a vendor for them and they're buying it, by all means, then that's great. You've got a commercial transaction. But if not, as I said, we've got daily people having stuck at customs, and a lot of times it's not the goods like returning and just, oh, I'm sorry, it's goods getting stuck there, burnt, destroyed. And, especially for brands that want to do that, like I said, it's rather get it right from the start than, make it come back and bite you in 3-4 years when you've grown this to quite a proportionate size. And all of a sudden there's audit trails being asked for importation and certain documentation needed. So look, I'm not here to scare you. There's many ways to look at doing it. I think it's very much up to your risk appetite and what you see your business to be.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the importer of record part, which is really key. There's also the compliance part where we always find it where businesses are like, okay, well, our product is fine for the US market, so surely it's fine for Europe.
It's the biggest mistake you can make. I mean, if you've got a basic product like a plastic iPhone cover or something that you highly likely could just get your goods in, right? And we could only assist you with the VAT registration. And I'm not going to upsell my lawyers for you when I don't think it's needed. But especially if you've got a more complex product, I think for me, it's very strange that people no one would go to court without having a lawyer defend them, but yet they want to go into a foreign country that they know nothing about and they just want to defend their own products, right? It doesn't make sense for me, especially if you, as I said, if you value the longevity of your company and knowing that you're mitigating the risk. So what we have at Z is we've got a big team of lawyers that specialize in e-commerce in different product categories. And on an ASIN specific level, we go make sure your product complies with every regulation for import and for sale in that country. So that's a dedicated, just as you would have an account manager, a dedicated lawyer on demand that assists you with everything from EPR to responsible person to everything you would need on your products in that foreign country. And I think, once again, you can do that yourself, but as a brand owner, you know the power of Google and SEO. I would highly discourage you from just clicking on every link that's SEO optimized with affiliations and ending up paying thousands and thousands of dollars to get your products compliant, whereas we could have probably saved you money by saying, listen, of these 10 things you read on this blog, you only need 4. The other 6 is not needed. It's additional. So I think there's that money save of saying you don't want to comply with the wrong things, and you also don't want to overpay. So we've got a great supply network where we actually onboard and the discounts we get from our suppliers to our clients. We've got a strict no affiliation policy that we take from any suppliers in our network. So that discount we on charge is our fees that we would have get from referring you to them given to the client. So it's in the long run that ROI calc of saying these are the costs we actually saving you compared to what it costs you.
Because we see it with businesses where they just go, oh no, we'll go onto Amazon. We see someone else is selling a similar product. We'll buy it and we'll see what they're, like if they're trying to check about compliance with a label and everything. Well, they've got away with it, so they probably don't need it. And it's always
it could work. Okay, I'm not here to scare you. It's actually a brilliant idea, but it's once again, it's taking a cheap solution that could bite you in the long run. And if you're happy sitting there, like biting your nails, seeing if it clears customs, you're anyway not a great fit for us as a client, which is fine. There's different ways to skin a cat, but we're here to help businesses that want to grow and want to do it in an effective way, knowing there's someone that's saving them this time. So that's from a compliance perspective. And I think we don't really have to touch on that. That's just a regulation that you need to do, that plus a URI number. And I think what you also mentioned, when it gets to Europe, it gets expensive because if you want to sell pan-EU, which I highly recommend, because it's much lower fulfillment fees, it's a wider network, it's really important to go and see, what your demand looks like in Europe before just, going there. But I think if you just want to go one country, mainly Germany would be your best bet. It's sometimes customs, the declaration methods are just much higher than France. So, but that's a much more like in-depth conversation that we could take, off the podcast for brands that have considered it or are doing it or are scared of doing it. But yeah, I think those are the main things. And then, like I said, we're not a freight forwarder, which is a lot of times what people want to quote on, but we do have really competitive freight rates. So because we do such bulk shipments across the globe via road, sea, and air, we can help you with your entire expansion into the country, from pickup in country to the clearance to the taxes and all of the compliance.
Yeah, awesome. Because there's with Europe, there's a couple more rules. You mentioned the others with EPR, isn't it? And having a responsible person as well.
No, and it depends per product. So it's so difficult to, you can't standardize it because there's physically millions of different products, and each one has different things. So it's so important to go look at each and see, what's needed.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're, I always ask this question to all our guest speakers. If you were to give that tip to that business who is looking to expand, that say they've done everything in their marketplace, they're ready.
Yeah.
What would be that one tip that you would pass on to summarize sort of everything that you've mentioned today?
So great question, Karina. I think leverage off the work service providers could do for you, especially when it comes to understanding what the cost is. I think just as e-commerce, there's a lot of work we do in the before onboarding that is completely free, that we can sit with you and get you those knowledge, get you those costings, get your duties and taxes calculated. Because if it doesn't make sense for you, it wouldn't make sense to us either. But having someone to do that for you, especially upfront, would give you such a better idea if the opportunity is feasible or not. So I think that would be my tip is, I wouldn't say, just jump into it and pay. Get as much work upfront done and see if it makes sense for you, because we're here to help you ultimately.
Awesome. That's really great. And I think that's something that businesses don't always think about. They just almost assume that, it's going to be too costly. We have a conversation with another company. They're going to force us into this contract. They're going to make us do X, Y. But actually, we as service providers, we want to evaluate with the client whether the opportunity is there, to know whether or not it is a partnership. It's not just about working with a business to take their money. It's about making it worthwhile, because there's no point otherwise if there isn't that opportunity. So yes, for anyone listening, that's a great tip. Take advantage of that free advice really to help you evaluate and decide. I know exactly.
We might be shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, we could be.
You know what I'm saying? It is so true, but I think it's because of how aggressive the Amazon marketing campaigns have been over the last 2-3 years. And I don't say we've not either. Like with all of the partnership, all of affiliation going wrong, clients or sellers sometimes feel that when they're having a conversation, it means that they have to pay, and I think it's actually so far and so few that actually like move out. For every 5 or 3 conversation you're having, it's maybe 1 or 2 that's a fit, and I think it's a good thing for people to realize that this work up front is generally there to see if it's a fit for both. It's not there, and I think that might actually be my favorite part of the conversation, because I think we didn't plan this, but it's so true and such a value add for them to not be scared to reach out, have those conversations. You only, you pay, you say. So if you don't want to onboard, it's nothing for us, and we understand that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. So we might be inundated with lots of free advice on expanding into Europe and globally, which is great. So on that note, and thank you for being an awesome guest today. You've given some really fantastic insights into that, unlocking that potential and all the different key considerations. One thing is, of course, we've spoken about Z. Do you want to give a bit more information if anyone is listening and's like, right, Daniel says some awesome stuff, I need to figure it out. I want to reach out to Z, I want to speak with Daniel. What should they do?
Yes. So I think for background, they can go on our website, www.z, so ZEE.co. But I think personally, like if you've listened and you want to have a conversation, I'm more than happy to jump on a call and look at it situation by situation. So they can mail me on danielste@z.co. So it's DANELSTE@z.co. I think you can also just maybe add that to the show notes. And yeah, we'd love to have the conversation, get our team quoting, and as I said, get that advice and see if it makes sense. We know that it's not going to happen within 2 weeks of having the conversation, and we're happy with that. We're here to help you and see if we can make sense of it. So yeah, thanks so much, guys. And thanks, Karina, for having me. It was a really fantastic conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. And for those that are listening, all that information will be in the description of the podcast. And if you need any help figuring out and looking into that opportunity from a sales perspective, or you're selling in that country and you need help with translations, optimization, or anything sort of account marketing related, then eCommerce Nurse is there to help you. So thank you once again, Daniel, and thank you listeners for checking in today.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Cheers, Karina.